Our next speaker is Dr. Say Schatz. Dr. Schatz is an Army civilian and an applied human systems scientist with an emphasis on human cognition and learning, instructional technologies, adaptive systems, human performance assessment, and modeling and simulation. As the ADL Initiative Director, Dr. Schatz oversees the program's comprehensive execution, guides its strategy, and ensures it aligns with U.S. DoD and federal government priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Schatz.
Hi, this is Dr. Say Schatz from the U.S. Advanced Distributed Learning Program. Unfortunately, the global pandemic has kept me from being there with you today, so instead I'm providing these remarks as a poor substitute. The Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, or ADL, is a Department of Defense program with authorities to support federal-wide. We perform research, documentation, and coordination activities. Specifically, our research involves distributed learning, like in the title. That means things like interoperability, new technologies, digital learning platforms, mobile learning, augmented reality for learning, AI, data, and other things in that vein. We also oversee defense policy related to distributed learning, NATO policy, and we help coordinate across those communities. We run something called the Defense ADL Advisory Committee, which includes members from all of the different defense components who do distributed learning. We do similar work with NATO and other global partners, and we run our own ADL Global Partnership Network. So much has happened in the world over the last year, and I know I don't need to tell you that. So instead of focusing on all of the challenges we've faced, let me highlight some of the accomplishments. Online learning, ADL, has become a silver lining during the pandemic, an unexpected bit of good fortune despite the adversity. Those nations that had the foresight, capability, and motivation were able to adapt. And for many of us, that's meant moving our more traditional training and education online. The United States military has similarly had to adapt, and it's been remarkable. We've seen a huge uptake in the amount of online learning being used. And in my opinion, all of this highlights a few truths. First, it's absolutely possible to do online learning in military settings. So many of those perceived obstacles to ADL disappeared when we actually had to do it. It's pretty amazing. Second, it's pretty easy to make bad online learning. Right now, during an emergency, people are more tolerant of it. But pretty soon, as this becomes the new normal, people will not be so forgiving of bad usability or poor user experiences. Third, we, the international ADL community, had better get our long-term plans ready. There is a window of opportunity now to change the military training and education culture. This is our chance, our catalyst. When the generals come knocking on our door, we need more than just a concept for the future. We had better be ready with a full strategy and a corresponding implementation plan. So let me share a little about what we're doing in the U.S. Department of Defense as far as relevant strategies. First, let's start before the global pandemic. Going back to 2018, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget released the President's Management Agenda. This outlines priorities for the entire federal government. It outlined 3 priorities to focus all of the departments, including the Department of Defense. Those included, first, IT modernization. That's for digital systems. Second, data accountability and transparency. Doing better at how we collect and manage and use data. And third, developing our people, focusing on a workforce for the 21st century. The current administration has yet to release a new President's Management Agenda, but I think it's safe to say that IT modernization, data, and upskilling the federal workforce will continue to remain top priorities. Next, in early 2019, Congress passed the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. It encourages federal government agencies, including the Department of Defense, to use data to inform their policy decisions. It also establishes processes for modernizing federal data management practices and for improving secure data access. Later that same year, in 2019, the U.S. government released the Federal Data Strategy. There is a lot to look at here. At a high level, it has a mission and practices and action steps. Specifically, there are 3 guiding principles that the strategy is oriented around. First, use data ethically, responsibly, and transparently. Second, use data smartly. Have a conscientious design in how it's being used. Make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that it has a purpose. And finally, develop a data-centric culture. Make sure that we invest in continuously learning, developing data leaders, and ensuring that there are organizational processes around data. Now, these 3 topics sound pretty straightforward, but they're broken into a lot of different practices and steps. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I will highlight that there is a pretty robust action plan on this site. And there's a lot of data here, a lot of information that you might be able to use in your own action plans. I highly recommend that you check this out and consider how data will be used in your own training, education, or other military settings. Just this year, the Department of Defense released its own data strategy. It's similar to the federal data strategy, but more specific to military systems. It includes 8 guiding principles. First, data is a strategic asset. It needs to be used carefully across the entire Department of Defense. Second, DoD must assign functional data managers across the data lifecycle so that that strategic asset can be effectively managed. Next, similar to the federal data strategy, the Department of Defense data strategy emphasizes ethics. We must put ethics at the forefront on how data is collected, used, and stored. Fourth, DoD must be able to collect data at the point of delivery and maintain a pedigree of those data across the entire enterprise. Relatedly, fifth, data must be available across the entire enterprise for all people and systems who are authorized to access it. Next, the data strategy recognizes the importance of data for AI training. That's a critical asset that has to be protected. Make sure that data are able to be used. That means making sure that they're unbiased, that they can be found, and that they're free from any embedded ethical concerns. Finally, the strategy urges DoD to implement end-to-end solutions that also include automation for information lifecycle management, and so that they are secure, compliant, and effective. So wait a second. Didn't I say a minute ago that I'm a training and education person, that I deal with online learning and things like that? Why am I talking about data? Well, let me explain. You've probably heard me talk about modernizing learning before. This book outlines a vision for the future of learning, where we have a technology-enabled learning ecosystem. In other words, a lifelong learning backbone that connects all of our training and education experiences together. It also uses data to adapt to individuals, teams, missions, and other needs, making the learning much more effective and efficient. It's also guided by learning science so that it's high quality, and it encompasses the full spectrum of learning, not just formal classroom activities or training exercises, but informal learning as well. And it supports the entire military, from individual needs to big picture organizational strategy. You can download a copy of the Modernizing Learning book on our website, adlnet.gov. Just search for Modernizing Learning and then go download the PDF here. So to continue the discussion about strategy, let me highlight where the strategy is in that Modernizing Learning book. The book is actually set up pretty much like a strategy, but the final chapter, chapter 19, is actually called Strategic Planning, and it outlines a clear roadmap for the future. Rather than giving you yet another set of numbered recommendations, let me just point you to this book and instead give you the high-level executive summary of why this all matters. The world around us continues to grow more and more complex. There are so many moving parts. And at the same time, we're putting higher demands on our military personnel. They need to be able to do more actions, to work with more technology, to be more agile, to have information at the point of need. We do not have more time, and we don't necessarily have technology that can replace what humans can do. Instead, we need to empower our workforce in new and better ways. More specifically, I mean, 1, our personnel need to have more sophisticated knowledge, skills, and abilities. In other words, they need to be able to cope with even more challenging obstacles than they've faced in the past. 2, they need to have a wider range of those capabilities. In other words, they can't just move, shoot, and communicate. They need those basic skills, but they also need medical skills and cybersecurity skills and language skills and multinational skills, and the list goes on. Finally, 3, they also need to have more agile skills because, as we've all seen this year, the world around us is changing rapidly, and the knowledge that we learned last year may not be relevant again this year. So you need to constantly be learning, unlearning, and relearning new skills. So what does all of this have to do with logistics? First, these increased performance demands affect you all. You need information at the point of need. You need more efficient training on all of your own evolving and expanding requirements. Plus, I'm sure you've personally experienced some of those examples of why we need to modernize our training and education systems to meet those demands. Second, although I'm talking about modernization for manpower, personnel, training, and education, from a high-level perspective, this all probably looks pretty similar to the processes and systems that you're familiar with. Imagine that what I'm talking about is the human capital supply chain, delivering capable person power to the point of need, the right training to the right people at the right time, so that the right personnel and civilians are ready for whatever missions arise. So in other words, the final question is, how can we be more efficient and effective and adaptive in how we prepare and manage our personnel? So that leads me to the last strategy that I wanted to discuss today. It's the newly released 10-year strategy from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. In other words, the top executive in my chain of command. The strategy recognizes that there are technological, global, and societal trends shaping the world around us, and that if we continue to do the same thing we've always done, if we continue to live in the status quo, then our overmatch will be eroded by our adversaries. The Personnel and Readiness strategy has 5 major goals, starting with data dominance. Having a digitally savvy workforce with robust information technology infrastructure, data management, and business processes. Data dominance supports the other priorities in the strategy, including the next 2, real-time and predictive data-driven readiness decisions, and an educated, trained, and prepared total force with a digitally centric mindset. But let me bring this back to learning and development for a moment. We need data about how our overall training and education works. It's all about data. Data about learning outcomes, How did somebody perform? What buttons did they click? How was their heart rate? What did they rate that course? Information about the learning experiences themselves. What were the learning objectives? What was the training scenario? What was the job experience? And certainly data about the learners. What are their preferences? What are their long-term experiences? Connecting it all together, in the middle, we have competencies, a way to commonly describe what it is people are learning or doing or capable of. And all of these data about these different things are available across the entire enterprise, between TRADOC and the operations, between a schoolhouse and a training environment, up and down the organization, from the local level in a classroom or on a training range to the uppermost levels with the secretaries of defense or other senior leaders, and across time, from today to tomorrow, longitudinally. That's what this strategy outlines, and it goes hand in hand with the DoD Data Strategy. It's entirely accurate to say that data is not only the most important thing in the system. However, it's a very important thing, and it's very timely. And if we want to modernize our advanced distributed learning systems, then we need to embrace data. And the time is right. With the crisis around us, now is an opportunity to catalyze, to leap ahead our online learning capabilities. As Winston Churchill said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste."